They said it gently at first. Soft voices. Careful words. The kind doctors and social workers use when they think you're fragile, when they think you won't notice the edges hidden beneath their concern. He's confused. He's not thinking clearly. We're worried about his capacity. I was lying in a hospital bed, tubes in my arms, machines breathing and blinking beside me, when my own family decided I was no longer fit to decide anything about my life. The room smelled like disinfectant and quiet defeat. Outside the narrow window, I could see a strip of sky changing color, day bleeding slowly into evening. Inside, my daughter sat closest to bed, her hands folded, eyes shiny but dry. My son stood behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight, looking more like a lawyer waiting to object than a child worried about his father. And behind them all, my daughter-in-law leaned against the wall, silent, observant, her face arranged into something that looked like sympathy if you didn't know her well. They spoke around me, not to me. That was the first thing I noticed. We just want to protect him, my daughter said to the social worker. He's been under so much stress. The doctor said his medication can affect judgment. My son nodded quickly. We've already taken steps to make sure everything is handled for his own good. Handled, such a neat word, like folding away a life into labeled boxes. The social worker looked at me then, her eyes kind but cautious. Mr. Harris, do you feel capable of managing your financial and personal affairs right now? I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because the question itself was a performance. The decision had already been made. I could feel it. Decisions don't arrive quietly. They hum in the air before they land. And in that moment, the room was buzzing. I'm tired, I said honestly. My voice came out rough and used, but I know exactly what's mine. My daughter-in-law smiled, just for a second, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. It wasn't cruel. It was satisfied. A week later, I was moved to a rehabilitation facility temporarily. That's how they framed it. Temporary care, temporary assistance, temporary guardianship. Funny how temporary things have a way of becoming permanent once papers are signed and signatures dry. They told me I shouldn't worry about the house. We're taking care of it. They told me the bills were paid, the utilities handled, the insurance updated. Focus on healing, my daughter said, squeezing my hand like she meant it. I focused. I watched. I listened. Because here's the thing about being underestimated. People stop hiding things from you. The first hint came from a nurse who didn't know who my son was. She was young, efficient, and talked while checking vitals. Your family's been busy, she said casually. Lots of calls. Lawyers, real estate offices. Sounds complicated. I said nothing, just nodded. The second hint came from a voicemail I wasn't supposed to receive. My phone had been returned to me by mistake after charging. One message. My daughter's voice rushed, excited. Agent says we can close fast. Buyers don't need to know everything, just that guardianship is in place. God, I can't believe this is finally happening. Finally happening. By the time I was discharged, the house was already gone. Not empty. Gone. They didn't even tell me directly. I found out from a letter forwarded to facility. Thick white paper, clean typeface, full of words meant to sound official and irreversible. Sale completed. Assets transferred. Ownership reassigned under guardianship authority. They came to visit that evening, all three of them. My son brought coffee. My daughter brought pastries. My daughter-in-law brought nothing but that same carefully arranged expression. We didn't want you to find out this way, my daughter said, eyes dropping. But the house, it was too much. Too many memories. Too much responsibility for you now. It was a logical choice, my son added quickly. Doctors agreed stress would be dangerous. I looked at them, at the people I had raised, protected, trusted, at the woman who had joined our family, and quietly learned every weakness we had. And where am I supposed to go? I asked. We've arranged something, my daughter-in-law said smoothly. A nice assisted living place. You'll be comfortable. Everything you need. Everything they decided I needed. That night. alone in the small temporary room they'd arranged. I finally let myself feel it. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something clearer. Because while they had been busy declaring me unfit, busy celebrating their efficiency, busy selling what they believed they now owned, they had overlooked something essential. They assumed confusion meant incompetence. They assumed illness erased foresight. They assumed paperwork only worked one way. Years earlier, long before hospital beds and whispered meetings, I had learned a lesson the hard way. Never place your entire life into a single document. I had watched a friend lose everything because of one missing clause, one unchecked assumption. And I had promised myself I would never make the same mistake. So when I built my estate plan, I did it quietly, carefully, with a lawyer who asked questions no one else thought to ask, with language designed not to threaten, not to alarm, just to wait. A clause that only activated under very specific conditions. Conditions like guardianship. Conditions like declarations of incapacity. Conditions like assets being sold without my direct consent. They didn't know that. They didn't know that the moment they signed those papers, the clock had started. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the distant sounds of other residents settling into sleep, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront them. I smiled, because celebrations built on assumptions rarely last, and they had just made the biggest assumption of their lives. They thought the hard part was over. That's what people like my children always believe, that once papers are signed and keys are handed over, the story ends neatly. They don't understand that real endings don't arrive with signatures. They arrive later, quietly, when everyone has stopped paying attention. The assisted living place they chose for me was clean, efficient, and completely wrong. Beige walls, scheduled meals, friendly staff trained to speak slowly, loudly, as if age automatically dulls intelligence. They placed me there like furniture they no longer needed but didn't want to throw away. "You'll like it here," my daughter said the day they dropped me off. "It's temporary, Dad, just until everything settles." Everything had already settled in their favor, or so they thought. I watched them leave from the window of my small room. My son walked ahead, already on his phone. My daughter hesitated for half a second, then followed. My daughter-in-law never looked back. She didn't need to. In her mind, this chapter was closed. The first few days, I did exactly what they expected. I rested. I ate when told. I attended physical therapy. I asked no questions and made no calls in front of anyone. People underestimate silence. They think it means surrender. In reality, silence is often preparation. At night, when the halls were quiet and the nurses rotated shifts, I replayed every detail in my mind. The guardianship paperwork, the timing of the sale, the language they used when explaining things to me, rushed, simplified, confident. Confidence is always the loudest clue. People who double-check don't rush. On the fourth day, I asked the front desk for my personal belongings. Wallet, phone, documents. "Your daughter said we should hold on to some of those," the receptionist said kindly. "I need my reading glasses," I replied, smiling, "and my address book, the physical one. Doctor says puzzles help cognition." She hesitated, then nodded. Protocols exist, but so does politeness. That night, I made my first call, not to my family, to my lawyer. He answered on the second ring. That alone told me something. Lawyers who know what's coming tend to answer quickly. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," he said calmly. "So, I replied. "I suspected," he said. "Guardianship declarations trigger alerts in my system. Not automatically, but when paired with asset transfers, yes." I closed my eyes. "Did they?" "Yes," he said. "They sold the house." "And the clause?" There was a pause, just long enough to be deliberate. "It activated the moment guardianship was finalized and the property was sold without your direct authorization," he said. "Exactly as written." I let out a slow breath. Not relief. Confirmation. What does that mean? I asked, though I already knew. "It means," he said carefully, "that every asset transferred under that authority is now subject to immediate review, including proceeds. including secondary transfers, including any celebration purchases. I pictured my daughter-in-law's smile, the way her eyes had flicked briefly toward my son when the sale was mentioned, as a confirming a private victory. When do they find out? I asked. That depends, he replied. Do you want them warned or surprised? I smiled again, surprised. The next week, I became invisible. My family stopped visiting. Not all at once, gradually. My daughter texted every other day, then every few days. My son stopped calling altogether. My daughter-in-law never reached out at all. They believed distance meant safety, that I was settling into my new, smaller life. What they didn't know was that every day, behind the scenes, paperwork was unfolding like a slow avalanche. The house sale proceeds were frozen pending verification. That alone caused confusion. Then questions. Then tension. The buyers called. The agent called. My son called the agent. My daughter called the bank. No one called me. Not yet. The first crack appeared when my daughter showed up unexpectedly one afternoon. She looked tired. Not worried, irritated, like someone inconvenienced by a problem that shouldn't exist. Dad, she said, forcing a smile, have you been talking to anyone? About what? I asked, folding a newspaper. There's some confusion, she said carefully, with the sale. The bank flagged something. I looked at her, really looked, the crease between her eyebrows, the way her fingers kept tapping her purse strap. Confusion happens, I said mildly. Her jaw tightened. The lawyer says there's a clause. I raised an eyebrow. Is there? She stared at me then. For the first time since this began, she looked uncertain. They're asking for your confirmation, she said. Your direct confirmation. I thought I was unfit, I replied softly. She flushed. That's not what we meant. It's what you signed. She didn't answer. That evening, my son called. Why didn't you tell us? He snapped, skipping pleasantries. Tell you what? I asked calmly. That you had something in place, he said. That there was something that could cause this. I smiled into the phone. You didn't ask. He exhaled sharply. This is serious. The money's on hold. We've already made commitments. Commitments? I echoed. There was silence. Then, reluctantly, expenses. I could almost see it now. Plans made too early. Furniture bought. Deposits placed. Confidence spent before it was earned. Talk to your sister, he said finally. We need to fix this. Fix. They still believe this was a technical issue, a misunderstanding, something I would correct for them once they explained it properly. They still believed I was on their side. They were wrong. The final call came 3 days later, from my daughter-in-law. Her voice was calm, controlled, but tight, like someone gripping a steering wheel too hard. We need to talk, she said. Yes, I replied. We do. I think there's been a mistake, she said carefully. A misunderstanding in the documents. There usually is, I said, when people rush. She paused. Then more sharply, this is affecting all of us. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the courtyard below, where other residents walked slowly in circles, unaware of the storms unfolding elsewhere. No, I said quietly. This is revealing all of you. She didn't respond. And for the first time since this began, I heard something new in her silence. Not confidence. Fear. Fear changes people faster than guilt ever does. I could hear it in my daughter-in-law's breathing when she finally agreed to meet. Not at the facility. She insisted on somewhere neutral. Public. Safe. A cafe near the hospital. Glass walls. Too many witnesses for real honesty. People who are afraid always choose places like that. She arrived first. Perfect posture. Perfect makeup. Hands wrapped tightly around a coffee she wasn't drinking. When she saw me walking with my cane, a prop I no longer needed but found useful, her eyes flicked downward for just a moment, calculating, measuring weakness. I sat across from her slowly. You look well, she said. You look concerned, I replied. She smiled thinly. Things have become complicated. They usually do, I said, when people assume ownership without understanding structure. Her jaw tightened. This doesn't have to get ugly. I laughed softly, not mockingly, almost kindly. It already did. You just didn't notice when it happened. She leaned forward. The clause. We've read it now. Good, I said. Most people never read that far. You knew this could happen, she said. You planned for it. I planned for possibilities. I corrected. One of them happened. She exhaled sharply. You could withdraw it. I tilted my head. Why would I? Because, she said, lowering her voice, this affects your children. I met her gaze, held it, let the silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably. No, I said calmly. This affects decisions they made. Her fingers tightened around the cup. We were trying to help. You were trying to control. I replied, there's a difference. She straightened. You're being emotional. I smiled. That's what people say when logic isn't on their side. She tried another angle then. Softer, warmer. You're alone now. We're still your family. I leaned back. Family doesn't erase someone and call protection. Her eyes hardened. The mask slipped for just a second. You don't understand the pressure we were under, she said. The house was too valuable to just sit there. The opportunity. There it is, I said gently. The truth always shows up when people get tired. She stood abruptly. You're enjoying this. No, I said. I'm learning from it. She left without another word. 2 days later, the official notices arrived. Certified letters. Formal language. Legal consequences explained in clean paragraphs. Asset reviews. Temporary injunctions. Requests for sworn statements. My son panicked. He showed up unannounced at the facility, red-faced, pacing my small room like a trapped animal. Do you have any idea what you've done? He demanded. Yes, I said. That's the difference between us. You've frozen everything, he said. The sale money, the accounts, even the investment fund. Not me, I corrected. The clause. He stopped pacing, looked at me, really looked this time. You planned this, he said quietly. I planned for you, I replied. I just hoped you'd never prove me right. He ran a hand through his hair. We thought you'd lost clarity. I lost trust, I said. Clarity came later. He swallowed. You could end this today. Could I? I asked. Yes, he said. One statement. One signature. And then what? I asked. You put the locks back on? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. My daughter came next. Tears this time. Real ones, I think, or at least well-practiced. We were scared, she said. You were sick. We didn't know what would happen. So you decided without me. I said, we did what we thought was best. For who? I asked. She cried harder. I never meant to hurt you. I believe that, I said. Intent doesn't cancel impact. The final escalation came from the lawyers. They're lawyers. Formal letters turned sharper. Accusations of manipulation. Claims of undue influence. Subtle threats wrapped in professional courtesy. My lawyer smiled when he read them. They're bluffing, he said. They don't want discovery. Why not? I asked. Because discovery exposes timelines, he replied. And timelines expose intent. I nodded. Proceed. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Guardianship review. Asset authorization. Capacity reassessment. Funny how suddenly I was fit enough to be evaluated. I walked into that room upright. Alert. Prepared. My children sat together. My daughter-in-law sat slightly apart. No smiles now. No confidence. The evaluator asked questions. Complex ones. Financial scenarios. Hypotheticals. Memory tests disguised as conversation. I answered calmly. Precisely. When asked why I believed the clause existed, I said simply, because power should never belong to those who rush to take it. The room went quiet. The recommendation came swiftly. Guardianship, suspended pending full review. Asset authority, revoked. Temporary control, returned to me. My son looked like he'd been punched. My daughter covered her mouth. My daughter-in-law stared straight ahead, unmoving. But it wasn't over, because the clause didn't just protect assets. It restructured consequences. The house sale was unwound, penalties applied, legal fees assigned. Any funds already spent flagged as personal liability. Their celebration purchases, vacations booked, renovations planned, deposits paid, all now debts they owned. When my daughter-in-law finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "You're ruining us." I looked at her calmly. "No," I said, "I'm returning things to their proper order." I left that room knowing something important had shifted. Not just control, respect. They no longer saw me as fragile. They saw me as dangerous. And the most satisfying part? I still hadn't raised my voice. Power doesn't announce itself when it returns. It settles quietly, like weight rediscovered in your own hands. I felt in the days after the hearing, not as triumph, but as clarity. My phone rang more often. My name appeared again on documents without qualifiers attached to it. No acting on behalf of. No temporary authority. Just my name. Clean. Whole. My family, on the other hand, began to fracture. The first sign was silence. Not the strategic kind I had used, but the confused, paralyzed kind that follows a plan collapsing too fast to adjust. Group messages stopped. Coordinated explanations unraveled. Each of them, suddenly aware of personal exposure, began protecting themselves. I didn't have to do anything. Pressure does the work for you when truth is involved. My daughter called one evening, voice low, strained. They're saying the penalties might fall on us individually. Who's they? I asked. The lawyers, she replied. And the buyers. And the bank. I leaned back in my chair. Yes, that's how responsibility works. She swallowed. We didn't think it would go this far. It always does, I said. You just never imagine yourself on the receiving end. She hesitated. My brother says this was all her idea. I didn't respond immediately. She says it was yours. My daughter added quietly. There it was. Fear doesn't just change people. It reveals alliances. When consequences arrive, loyalty becomes conditional. Everyone remembers who signed what, who suggested what, who benefited first. I'm not interested in blame, I said finally. I'm interested in accountability. The next call came from my son, late at night. No anger this time, just exhaustion. They're reviewing the investment fund, he said, the one tied to the house sale. Yes, I replied. They say the structure violates fiduciary obligations under guardianship authority. That's correct, I said. You knew that too, he said, not asking. I knew the risk, I replied. You accepted it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, almost pleading, what do you want? I smiled slightly, not because I enjoyed the question, but because he finally asked it. I want, I said slowly, to live without being managed by people who mistake access for ownership. He exhaled, and if we give that, then you get what everyone gets when they make a mistake and learn from it. I said, a chance to move forward. And if we don't, you'll find out what happens when clauses are enforced fully, I replied calmly. He hung up without another word. The house became the next battlefield. Legally, the sale was already collapsing. Buyers were furious. Agents were panicking. My children blamed each other. But the physical space, that mattered too. I visited it one afternoon, unannounced. The locks had already been changed once. That was irony I appreciated. This time I used my own key, the one still registered under my name, the one no one remembered to invalidate. Inside, the house smelled unfamiliar. New furniture, new colors, evidence of celebration, evidence of certainty. I walked through slowly. The living room where my children learned to walk. The kitchen where arguments and apologies had both been spoken. Upstairs, the bedroom where my wife had once told me, promise me you won't let them forget whose house this is. I kept that promise. I found documents on the dining table. Contracts, receipts, plans drawn too early. My daughter-in-law's handwriting in the margins. Confident, assumptive, I photographed everything, not for revenge, for record. That evening, my lawyer reviewed the images and nodded. This strengthens the case. Good, I said. Are you sure you want to proceed fully? He asked. It will be unpleasant. I'm not doing this to be pleasant, I replied. I'm doing it to be clear. The final fracture came at dinner. They asked me to meet, all three of them. Neutral restaurant, quiet, private room. Consider a negotiation, they said. My daughter arrived first. Nervous. My son followed, rigid. My daughter-in-law came last, composed but brittle. No one smiled. We need resolution, my daughter began. You need relief, I corrected. My son leaned forward. Name your terms. I folded my hands. Full acknowledgement that guardianship was misused. Silence. Written, I added. Filed. My daughter-in-law stiffened. That's an admission. Yes, I said. It should be. She shook her head. That could destroy us. No, I replied. What you did already did that. This just records it. My daughter spoke quietly. What else? Restoration of my residence. I said. Immediate. My son nodded. That can be arranged. And, I continued, a separation of financial authority. Permanently. My daughter-in-law finally spoke. You're cutting us out. I'm correcting imbalance, I said. She laughed sharply. You don't need to go this far. I looked at her calmly. You went far enough for all of us. She stood. This is punishment. No, I said softly. This is boundary. She stared at me, then at my children, realizing something they already had. She was alone. The agreement was drafted within days. Public record. Clear language. No ambiguity. The clause had done its job. It didn't just protect assets. It exposed intent. The fallout wasn't loud. There were no dramatic confrontations. No apologies worthy of forgiveness. Just distance. Adjustments. Consequences settling into place. I returned to my home alone. Not lonely. Alone by choice. I replaced the locks again. This time, properly. And as I stood in the doorway that first night, the house quiet around me, I understood something deeply comforting. The most devastating revenge isn't destruction. It's restoration without permission. Restoration changes the air in a place. The first night back in my house, I slept lightly, not because I was afraid, but because my body was adjusting to something it hadn't felt in a long time. Control. Every sound felt sharper. Every shadow felt earned. This wasn't a return to the past. It was a reset. In the days that followed, I moved deliberately. I didn't rush to redecorate. I didn't undo everything they had changed. I wanted to see it clearly first, what they had added, what they had erased, what they had assumed would never matter again. People reveal themselves most honestly through the things they replaced too quickly. The expensive furniture in the living room told me they had already imagined a future without me. The family photos removed from the hallway told me they didn't want reminders of the version of me that owned the place. The locked filing cabinet in the study told me they thought paperwork was power. They were wrong. I opened the cabinet easily. They had changed the lock, but not the habit of hiding things in obvious places. Inside were copies of contracts, draft of plans, and handwritten notes discussing next steps. Vacation properties, renovations, investment reallocations. All of it dated before the guardianship was finalized. Premeditation leaves fingerprints. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. His reply was short. This confirms intent. You're protected. Protected. A word that felt different now. Meanwhile, the consequences continue to spread outward, quietly but relentlessly. The buyer sued the agent. The agent sued the brokerage. The brokerage demanded explanations from my son, whose name appeared too frequently in email chains to ignore. Financial institutions placed holds. Credit tightened. Invitations stopped coming. When people lose access to your resources, they often mistake it for cruelty. My daughter came by one afternoon without calling. She stood at the door for a long moment before knocking. like she wasn't sure she was welcome anymore. I let her in. She looked around, eyes lingering on the furniture, the light, the familiar shape of a place she once assumed would always be available to her. "You're really back," she said. "Yes," I replied. She sat at the kitchen table, hands folded. "I'm sorry." I didn't respond immediately. "I didn't think it would go this far," she continued. "I thought we were just helping." I met her gaze. Helping doesn't acquire secrecy. She nodded slowly. "I know." There was a long pause. Then quietly, "She's blaming you. Says you planned this to hurt us." "I planned to protect myself," I said. "What you felt afterward was consequence." She swallowed. "My brother thinks you're never going to forgive us." I considered that. "Forgiveness," I said, "isn't a transaction. It's a process. And processes require honesty." She looked up. "What do you want from me?" I didn't smile. I didn't soften my voice. "I want you," I said, "to stop asking what I'll give back and start asking what you took." Tears filled her eyes. This time, I believed them. She left quietly. My son never came. He sent messages instead. Long ones at first, then shorter, then nothing. Pride is a stubborn thing. It often survives longer than relationships. My daughter-in-law tried once more. A letter, carefully written, apologetic in tone, defensive in content. She acknowledged missteps. She expressed regret over misunderstandings. She requested a path forward. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Some conversations don't deserve a response. Weeks passed. Life settled into a new rhythm. I hired new advisors, updated my will, revised my estate plan again, not because it failed, but because it had succeeded. I added clarity where ambiguity once lived, names where assumptions once sat. I didn't remove my children entirely. I adjusted access. There's a difference. The final twist came unexpectedly. A call from the same social worker who had once questioned my capacity. "I wanted to inform you," she said, sounding uneasy, "that there's a complaint filed." "By whom?" I asked. She hesitated. "Your daughter-in-law." "About what?" I asked calmly. "She's alleging emotional manipulation," the social worker said. "Claims you coerce her family into financial distress." I almost laughed. "And?" I asked. "And after review," she continued, "we found no basis. In fact, the documentation suggests the opposite." I thanked her and hung up. That was the last move they had. And it failed. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same system they tried to use to erase me had now confirmed my clarity, my competence, my right to stand exactly where I was. One evening, alone in the living room, I poured a drink and sat in the chair by the window. The house was quiet again, not empty, but settled, like it had accepted the correction. I thought about how close I had come to losing everything, not because I was careless, but because I trusted the wrong people with the right access. That's the lesson no one likes to learn. The danger isn't strangers. It's familiarity without accountability. I didn't feel victorious. I felt awake. And that, I realized, was better, because the story wasn't over yet. Not completely. There was still one thing left to decide. Not about assets, not about control, but about what kind of distance was permanent and what kind was earned back. Closure doesn't arrive with applause. It comes quietly, often disguised as an ordinary morning where nothing urgent demands your attention. That's how it felt the day I woke up and realized there were no unread legal notices, no tense phone calls, no strategy left to execute. For the first time in months, the silence wasn't tactical. It was earned. I stood in the kitchen making coffee, sunlight stretching across the counter, and understood something important. The crisis had never been about the house, or the money, or even the betrayal itself. It had been about permission. For years, I had given it freely. Permission to speak for me, decide for me, assumed they knew better. Illness hadn't created that habit. It had merely exposed it. And once permission is revoked, people who benefited from it feel punished, even when nothing is taken from them except control. That realization shaped my final decisions. I didn't call a family meeting. I didn't issue ultimatums. I simply acted. The state revisions were finalized first. Clear language, no emotional phrasing, authority defined with precision, guardianship triggers rewritten to remove ambiguity. Not because I fear repetition, but because clarity is a kindness to your future self. Then I addressed the assisted living facility. Official notice of discharge. Apologies from staff who now spoke to me differently. Respect has a way of catching up once paperwork does. I returned fully to my routines. Morning walks, grocery shopping, reading in the afternoons. Life resumed, not as it was before, but as it should have been all along, autonomous. Weeks later, my daughter asked to meet again. This time, she chose my house. I agreed. She arrived cautiously, like someone entering a space that had once been familiar but now demanded permission. We sat at the dining table, the same one where I had photographed evidence weeks earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said quickly. "I just wanted to talk." I nodded. Then, "Talk." She took a breath. "I didn't realize how much I was deferring decisions to her," she admitted. "I thought I was being supportive. I see now I was being complicit." I listened without interrupting. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued. "I just want you to know I understand what we did. Understanding doesn't heal everything, but it opens a door to truth. Accountability," I said gently, "isn't proven by words. It's proven by what you don't repeat." She nodded, eyes wet. "I know." We talked for hours, not about money, not about the past in detail, about boundaries, about respect, about what adulthood really means when parents stop being resources and start being people again. When she left, she hugged me, carefully, like someone aware of the fragility of second chances. My son never came, and that, too, was an answer. He sent one final message weeks later. Short, neutral, "I hope you're well." I replied with one word: "I am." Some relationships don't end with explosions. They fade quietly when accountability becomes too heavy to remember. As for my daughter-in-law, she disappeared entirely from my life. No calls, no letters, no complaints. I heard through others that her marriage was strained, that finances were tight, that resentment had replaced confidence. I felt no satisfaction in that. Consequences don't require celebration. They simply exist. One afternoon, months later, I sat with my lawyer reviewing final confirmations. "It's rare," he said, closing the file, "to see someone execute restraint so effectively." I smiled. "Restraint isn't mercy. It's precision." He nodded. "You could have destroyed them." "I didn't want destruction," I said. "I wanted correction." He stood to leave, then paused. "Do you regret not confronting them sooner?" I considered the question. "No," I said. "If I had confronted them, they would have adjusted their tactics. Silence let them reveal intent." He smiled knowingly and left. That evening, I stood in the doorway of my home, keys in hand, lights warm behind me. The locks were new, the systems updated, the house secure. But the most important security wasn't mechanical. It was internal. I had learned something that no document could protect for me, that trust must be earned continuously, not inherited, that access should never be assumed permanent, and that the most dangerous thing you can give someone isn't power. It's unchecked authority paired with emotional entitlement. They had declared me unfit. In doing so, they revealed their own. The hidden clause didn't ruin their celebration. Their assumptions did. The clause simply waited. And in the end, so did I.